Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Waiting for some more people to come in from the waiting room. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our last training module of the Watch for Me NC 2022 program year. I'm Kristen Blank. I know that a lot of you know me from emails and scheduling and running tech for our trainings. And today, as a communications specialist for the UNC Highway Safety Research Center, I'm playing a slightly different role in introducing training and talking about communications efforts around Watch for Me activities and events. I'm sharing this session with Seth Lejeunesse, Senior Research Associate at HSRC and part of the Watch for Me technical team. If you remember way back to May, Seth kicked off our training modules by introducing the safe systems approach. And today, he'll be sharing information about messaging and framing communications around pedestrian and bicyclist topics. We are also excited to welcome Julia Casadante, Communications Manager at Governor's Highway Safety Program. Julia oversees GHSP's communications and is responsible for the strategic development and implementation of public affairs activities, media relations, and public awareness and education campaigns. She is joining us today to share information about NCDOT's communications plans and messaging for Watch for Me this year. Before we dive in, I have a few housekeeping items to review. First, please feel free to turn on your camera if you're comfortable in wanting to do so. However, please mute your microphone if you're not sharing more information or asking questions during the presentation. Also, please know that this session is being recorded and will be available for others to review from our training website. If you're having problems with audio or connectivity, there are several things you can try. You can call into the phone line instead of using computer audio. You can also turn off your video camera to save bandwidth, or you could try exiting and re-entering the Zoom. If you're having issues with technical issues, you can send a chat to Sarah O'Brien in the chat box at any time. I know a lot of you have my information handy for helping with tech issues in the past, but for this session, you're going to want to chat with Sarah for help, as I am not that skilled as a multitasker to be able to both present and help with tech issues at this time. Also, you can use the same chat to submit questions or add additional information, and Sarah will monitor and share. So with that, here we are at the 5th and final training of the Watch for Me 2022 program year. We've shared this information during the previous 4 training modules, but I'll quickly state it again to orient us all to the background and reason for why we are here today. The Watch for Me program aims to reduce pedestrian and bicycle injuries and deaths through a comprehensive, targeted approach of public education, community engagement, and leveraging specific law enforcement efforts. For our training today, we are going to be touching on all of these approaches through the lens of communications. We'll be going through communications efforts that allow us to include education and community engagement, and how law enforcement and other community members can contribute to these efforts. The Watch for Me program held 5 training workshops this past year, and this is the last live session. If you didn't have a chance to attend one of these sessions, they have all been recorded and are on our training website. This year, we offered Watch for Me training to anyone who wanted to learn more about pedestrian and bicycle safety and related topics. We still had an application process for communities who wanted to participate in the program and complete the training requirements for receiving technical assistance and materials. These are the 22 communities who are recognized Watch for Me partners this year. And I share this information because some of the info today will be geared specifically for them. That said, if you're participating in the meeting today, but are not from a partner community, there is still a lot of info here that will hopefully be helpful for you to apply in your communities or just to learn more. For instance, specific to Watch for Me communities, as a reminder, a law enforcement officer from your community is required to attend 3 out of the 5 trainings. One of these trainings must be Module 2, and the law enforcement officer should have attended either the live session or the recorded version. Participation of a law enforcement officer from a Watch For Me community is mandatory to be eligible for one, access to GHSP's statewide traffic enforcement program reporting system, also known as STEP, so that your agency can report on eligible Watch For Me activities to earn credits. And two, receiving Watch For Me educational materials and safety materials, which we will be discussing further today. So with that, let's get into the workshop topic. Today, for our communications around bicyclist and pedestrian safety training workshop, we have a few objectives and want for you to leave the session with one, knowing more about the educational materials that Watch For Me partner communities receive. Two, feeling empowered and inspired to use these materials and more for community outreach and engagement. Three, learning new ways to identify your partners to help with communications efforts. Four, understanding the basics for messaging and framing about safety for people walking and biking. And five, learning more about NCDOT's Watch For Me communications efforts around the state and what you can do to amplify efforts. How will we meet these objectives? First, we are going to talk about the resources that are available as part of the Watch For Me program. This includes a communications toolkit, which we will review. We'll also talk about educational materials that you'll receive to help with outreach in your communities. Then we'll talk about how to talk about pedestrian and bicyclist topics and share ideas and tips for framing these messages. You'll see how these messages can apply to a variety of different platforms for sharing about safety for people walking and biking in your community. Finally, we'll learn more about NCDOT Watch For Me communications plan for this year and what you can expect to see or hear in and around your community. This will also help you anticipate how you can use these efforts in your community to talk about the program with different audiences. We'll wrap up the session with any questions or final thoughts you may have about all of these topics. And along the way, feel free to use the chat box to enter your questions. And we also seem to have a smaller group today, so feel free to go ahead and just chime in if you have any questions as you see them through the presentation. Let's talk first about the Watch For Me communications toolkit. This toolkit is a fairly new resource to the Watch For Me program and was developed to help better explain the outreach tools and resources that are available to partner communities. Again, though, even if you are not a partner community, the toolkit may be useful for learning more about different communications efforts to apply to your community. And you can find this on the Watch For Me partner resources page, and I believe Sarah has a link to share for this toolkit, and I'm going to thank her in advance or thank her if she's already shared it in the chat box. We developed the communications toolkit because we wanted a document that partners could go to for more information about the program, communications materials, and also communication strategies. So this includes a Watch For Me program overview, different ways to communicate about the program, and information about the educational materials that you'll receive to distribute in your communities. We also include information about crafting and framing messages about road user safety, specifically around people who walk and bike. We also include sample press releases, talking points, and safety tips that you can use as a foundation for building your own messages. We understand that a lot of people attending the training today may not be too involved in communications activities like writing press releases or developing social media messages. Hopefully, though, through this session, you'll take some of these ideas to the people in your community who are involved in these communities and can help with communications. You can also share the toolkit with them and other local people who are helping with communications. It's designed to be a shareable resource that helps explain the program and how they should be communicating about the program and the different efforts. One caveat I need to share, though, is that while communications is an important part of safety efforts, this activity alone will not lead to improved pedestrian and bicyclist safety. While the communications activities are a critical piece to help create awareness or share important community information, it will not lead to major behavior change or a culture of safety without engineering interventions. Communications, depending on if it's used for outreach and education, or for messaging to encourage behavior changes, or to encourage the use of personal protective equipment, such as using bicycle lights or reflective bands, is important within the structure, but it is not as effective as eliminating the exposure to crash risk. And for communications and outreach to be very effective, community members will need to coordinate locally and collaborate to bolster efforts. Ultimately, each community should be developing their own communications plan to increase awareness of 1, local community work, 2, safety issues related to people who walk and bike, and 3, how we can all keep each other safe while we're driving, walking, and biking. We recommend that community members coordinate with other people within their communities and develop a communications plan. And reviewing the communications toolkit will help build a foundation for each member to contribute to the plan. Let's start with thinking about all of the different people and organizations who may contribute to communications. There are a few levels of support to help. First, you have the UNC Highway Safety Research Watch for Me NC team. You've been working with the technical delivery team this entire program year via the training modules or targeted assistance we provide in individual meetings. And through those community meetings, the communications toolkit in the materials, we are also helping with coordinated communication strategies. The NC Department of Transportation Communications Office is also here to help. They lead communications for increasing awareness of programming across the state. As I mentioned when we started this session, Julia Casadante from GHSP is going to talk about this a little bit more, about efforts from prior years and plans for this year, so you can anticipate what to see in or around your area. They also help bolster the program by sharing important program announcements. Finally, there is the local communication support. This support and the role and activities may vary depending on your community. This would be a community member who helps with communications or takes the lead in developing communications and outreach. This person or team may be situated within a municipal communications office, or maybe a law enforcement officer who is leading public engagement. And there's a chance that this person may be you on the call today. One of the things we want to really encourage through this session is for you to think about who in your community can help with communications efforts, who can share your messaging or even help in developing those messages. We're also at the point now for our programming year that we are ready to launch our communications activities. This past summer, the training workshops were intended to help give a foundation for better understanding pedestrian and bicycle safety. And then our work with you in individual local partner meetings hopefully helped in applying these topics within your community. Now we are at the point where we can apply a lot of what we learned to outreach and education and use some of the safety materials and messages. And during this session, we're going to touch on ideas for planning events, public engagement, material distribution, and other key activities. This message is specific to Watch for Me partners. The Watch for Me program distributes materials to help with communications efforts. We're going to go through the materials that you'll receive and ideas for distribution. Before we go through the materials, I want to take a moment to go over 3 things. One is that Watch for Me materials are distributed to partner communities after a law enforcement officer from the partner community has attended the required program trainings. Then all program materials will be shipped to the law enforcement agency contact and address that was specified on the program application. Although members leading outreach and education efforts may distribute some of the materials during events, other items are specific to traffic laws related to pedestrian and bicyclist safety, and they must be distributed by law enforcement officers only. Therefore, it is important that the person distributing these materials has a firm understanding of the laws, and we will talk about this in more detail soon. Finally, each community is responsible for keeping track of their local distribution of materials. This information is required for reporting to GHSP. Reporting and tracking materials includes describing event details and specifying quantity or distributed materials. Partner members are encouraged to report their distribution frequently via an easy-to-use form found on our website. Let's talk about the program materials. You may be familiar with these images if you're familiar with the Watch For Me program, or you may have seen them around your community. A lot of our materials focus on key safety behaviors or on laws related to safe behaviors. Based on crash data, the key behaviors we are seeking to change statewide through education include driver yielding to pedestrians, safe passing of bicyclists, particularly in shared lane situations, attentiveness of everyone wherever they may be traveling, and being seen under dark or low light conditions. The Watch For Me program offers 4 different posters. 2 of these posters are general awareness. We have them in the English language version and also in Spanish language. This one says, "Make room for bikes." We also have posters that include tips for being a safe cyclist and posters that include tips for being a safe pedestrian. This is the Spanish language version of that poster. In all, you should receive 200 posters. You'll receive 25 English language versions of each poster and 25 Spanish language versions. These posters are also available in other languages from our website, including Mandarin, French, German, and Italian, and you can print or share them as images. And these posters may be distributed by all members of the partner community. From our program materials page, you'll also find graphics for other posters with safety messages that have been used in prior years. These posters are not printed and will not be part of your Watch For Me materials. However, they are available for use if your community would like to download and print. They can also be used for social media messaging, images within newsletters, and other online formats. We also offer English and Spanish language versions of these posters. Other items that you'll receive as part of the materials package are RAT cards. There are 3 types of RAT cards that focus on different messaging. One, which you see here, is the front and back card on general traffic safety laws and rules related to drivers, pedestrians, and bicyclists. This card includes general statutes related to driving, walking, and biking, so it's helpful for when you want to talk about specific laws. The second side of the card is dedicated to explaining different types of crosswalks. People driving or walking may not be aware of the different types of crosswalks and yielding laws. So this card explains driver yielding laws to pedestrians and crosswalks, even if the crosswalk is not marked. This RAT card has a lot of information. You will want to really know this card well because the information is helpful for explaining safe behaviors and different types of crosswalks. Explaining different types of crosswalks can be somewhat complex, so take some time to study this information and have a short pitch. And while you have the different diagrams on the card to help illustrate the description, you will want to be prepared to explain it beyond reading off the card. So think about how you would talk about these concepts to your coworkers, your family members, older adults, or kids. Test it out in advance to make sure that people understand. This RAT card is something that you can share at events and other outreach opportunities. Non-law enforcement personnel, community members may also help distribute this RAT card, but you will want to review this with them in advance to make sure that they are comfortable with the message and can explain it to others and their specific audience. So this is where your pitch will come in handy. I also want to point out something on our RAT cards, which is that we have language on here that says safety is a shared responsibility. While this is true, it is important to understand that while we may say this, it is a responsibility that is shared depending on how you are using the road and is not shared equally. How you are traveling, such as when someone is driving, their actions and behaviors have more of an impact on someone outside of and without the protection of a vehicle. There's also a responsibility for people who design the roads to keep people safe. And this is a concept that we're seeing federal agencies start to share more broadly in their communications, and Seth will talk about this concept in more detail soon. The second RAT card includes tips for safe behaviors as a pedestrian on one side and as a bicyclist on the other. This RAT card and the one shared before are also available in other languages, specifically Spanish, Mandarin, French, German, and Italian. You'll see that the tips include safety tips for people walking at night and in parking lots when drivers may be backing up and have obstructed views due to their maneuvers. And then for bicyclists, the safety tips also include hand signals that bicyclists use to communicate their intended maneuvers. And the third rack card has tips for being a safe driver on the front and back. It offers tips for driving at night and in parking lots. One of the things that we hear about from in communities is that drivers do not know that they are allowed to cross double yellow lines per General Statute 2149, which says pass bicyclists with 4 feet of space and a no passing zone. We also share bicyclist hand signals so that drivers can learn how bicyclists communicate on the road. Communities receive 500 of the rack cards in English and 250 in Spanish. The rack cards may be distributed by all members of the partner community, but it is recommended that non-law enforcement officers distributing the general traffic safety laws have a strong knowledge of the laws. While the general rules rack card is intended to be informative for all, understanding and explaining the rack card may be required at events and while engaging with the public. Also, as part of your materials package, you'll receive booklets with warning information provided on tear-off sheets. This is the front and back side of this sheet. These sheets are intended for distribution by law enforcement officers only and may be used in lieu of citations while providing a way for the officer to inform community members about traffic laws related to pedestrians and bicyclists. Law enforcement officers should have a strong understanding and knowledge of the laws when distributing warnings and communicating to the public. This is one of the reasons why we require law enforcement officers to attend the safety laws related to pedestrians and bicyclists to help have a stronger knowledge of the laws. You'll see that the laws related to yielding are stated on the first side of the sheet. And then there are 2 different situations for road users in which the driver either failed to yield to the pedestrian or the pedestrian failed to yield to the driver. This sheet can help better explain the laws to drivers and pedestrians if you are using them as part of operations in lieu of citations. The other side includes information on general statutes like the rack card for the rules of the road for different modes like walking, biking, and driving. This is another handout like the rack card that you'll want to be very familiar with and be able to talk about in a clear way with people you're distributing this to. So again, take some time to review this information so that you're comfortable with it to talk about it with others. You'll receive 15 books with warning information. Bicycle light sets, which include front and rear lights, are also included as part of the materials package. We also distribute reflective bands. Only law enforcement officers may distribute these items. For the bicycle lights, it is recommended that law enforcement officers give the lights to people who are observed riding without them in lieu of a citation. They may also be distributed at outreach and engagement events such as bicyclists that include a safety education component such as a helmet distribution or bicycle rodeos or at traffic gardens. The reflective bracelets can also be distributed at those kinds of events or any others with safety education programming. Police departments new to Watch For Me receive 2 sandwich boards and a Watch For Me banner. These materials are also distributed to only law enforcement agencies. The sandwich boards are to be used in conjunction with enforcement operations or placed at crosswalks. In a previous training module, specifically Module 2 on traffic laws and enforcement practices, we talked about operations activities, and these sandwich boards and signage would be used in areas where people driving, walking, and biking can see that operations are taking place, such as those focusing on driver yielding to pedestrians in a crosswalk, or any other operation that is being conducted in high priority places where safety is a concern. You'll also remember from our Module 3 on road design that these high priority areas are good places to bring in your local planning and engineering and see if there's any other opportunity for road design interventions, such as traffic calming measures. New communities also receive banners with Watch for Me messaging. These banners can be used at community events or serve as signage around areas where people walk and bike. They can also be used at media events. Some communities have used the banners when announcing a new roadway configuration or path or holding an event to bring awareness to safety issues in the community. So the banner can be used as a visual backdrop to bring the safety messaging to the forefront. Before we move on from the materials, I want to share that most of these materials are on our website. And as I mentioned previously, some posters and rack cards are available in other languages. And the materials for this year and materials used in prior years can be accessed online. Let's move on to talking about where and how communities have been using the Watch for Me materials. A lot of communities participating in Watch for Me this year and in prior years have been deeply involved in education and outreach activities and doing so in innovative ways. A lot of communities focus on outreach opportunities around walking and biking events like Walk to School Day and Bike to School Day, which are now also known as Walk and Roll to School Day and Bike and Roll to School Day, or around Halloween and Bike to School, which are all great ways to focus on safety for people who drive, walk, and bike, and also presents opportunities to participate in these events in a variety of ways. Other examples of events where materials can be distributed or where agencies can communicate about educational messages include new employee or student orientations, National Night Out. I know a lot of communities participate in their local National Night Out event, school events like orientation nights or student assemblies, bicycle safety clinics, and other local festivals. Other unique approaches to distributing program materials include placing materials around community facilities, including grocery stores, libraries, older adult centers, city or town halls, privately operated North Carolina license offices, local businesses, farmers markets, and of course, there are many other places in your community where you may be able to post these materials. You can also consider incorporating posters as digital or printed files as part of city TV channels, on websites, social media feeds, or on municipal utility bills. You can also include materials as part of a wider distribution program, such as lunch bag pickup programs. And this is actually something that Kill Devil Hills did during COVID-19. Their schools were distributing food twice per week for students to pick up, and they included Watch for Me rack cards in the pickup bags. We've also heard of communities distributing materials at other educational or training opportunities, such as driver's education classes or English as a second language courses. Instead of thinking about where you would want to distribute Watch for Me materials, you can also think about who you would want to reach out to. This not only helps in thinking about opportunities in reaching diverse audiences, but can also help you think about who in your community can help in communications efforts. In other words, who can help you raise awareness and spread messaging about safety for people who walk and bike. You can reach out to youth-oriented groups, including schools, daycares, or camps. We know that many communities work with their schools or other youth-oriented groups to talk about safety. Town or city agencies such as health and human services, parks and recreation, planning and engineering. Hopefully there's a way to reach your local city or town department so that they know about pedestrian and bicyclist safety and that there are opportunities for working together on combined efforts. Advocacy groups such as those oriented towards biking and walking or aging in place or even nature conservation groups can also help in sharing safety messaging. We have heard of some communities in the past working with bicycle and pedestrian advocacy committees. Local business organizations such as bike shops or chambers of commerce have also been part of some community efforts in the past for sharing messages. There are a lot of potential partners in terms of local businesses or groups. One community recently reported reaching out to local real estate agents as they frequently work within the community. And a coastal community also reported working with a rental agency to post information on safety in rental homes. And faith-based organizations are another potential partner to help share messaging and may be able to incorporate the message as part of their outreach. These are just a few examples of different groups. And you will want to think about not only the groups that you've reached out to and that you work with on a frequent basis, but also think about people or audiences that you haven't had the opportunity to engage with to talk about safety. In other words, who would benefit from learning more about safety while driving, walking, and biking, and how can you reach them? What are some other ways to share safety messages and raise awareness? Working with media outlets is another way that members can share information via newspapers, television, and radio news programs. Again, developing the actual content for or working with the media may not be part of your wheelhouse, but this is where you can reach out to your communications contact or public information officer to help develop media messages and outreach. Also, the communications toolkit provides sample press releases that can help or form the foundation for talking about program launch or different activities or special events like back to school and Halloween. You and your communications contact can use these samples and adapt for your purposes. I also want to point out from this screenshot of our website where we track media coverage, you can see that we don't have too many announcements yet for 2022, but if you look at prior years, you'll see that this usually picks up in September of each year as communities start their outreach. Social media is another way to reach out to community members. Although you may not be the person who manages the agency, city, or town Facebook/Meta or Twitter account, you can look to the person in your community who does manage the account and find out if there is an opportunity for sharing messages. A lot of communications folks are frequently looking for content, so there's a good chance that they'll want to help share messages. Here's an example of a social media message from Carrboro about Halloween, directing people to check out safety tips for a safe Halloween and a link to more information, including safety tips for drivers. And here's an example of another social media message. In this case, this is a message from NCDOT Charlotte area, increasing awareness about a community's participation in the Watch For Me program. This kind of message can help by letting the community and public know about the program and possibilities for collaboration. Social media is also something that you can leverage from other groups or organizations by reposting or updating the language to make it unique to your community. The Communications Toolkit provides a list of other organizations and their social media handles to follow and learn more and share safety messages. This is just a sample of groups who talk about road user safety, including safety for pedestrians and bicyclists. You can also think about the types of social media messages you post. For instance, last year, Alan Toney of Shelby was featured in a Mondays with the Mayor video that was shared on Facebook, where he talked about Watch For Me and a new marked crosswalk that was installed in their town. So this is a situation where Shelby has an existing platform in the Mondays with the Mayor series, and 1 week featured Watch For Me efforts and safety messaging. And it was shared on social media where there is an audience for this series. This is another way to think about creatively sharing messaging by working with other existing efforts. You can also use YouTube or other videos to help explain specific engineering or design. Describing street design or road user maneuvers, for example, can be challenging as it can be difficult for the listener to visualize the layout or the scenario based on description alone. There are a lot of resources or videos that already exist to help explain. And though they may not be specific to your community, you can use them as examples for how they could apply. This image is a screenshot from a video series that was developed by the Pedestrian and Bicycle Information Center to show situations that lead to a crash between a driver and a pedestrian or a bicyclist. The videos show the crash from each road user perspective and road characteristics and road user maneuvers that led to the crash. Finally, I want to mention one more thing to think about, which may be helpful for communications, And this is something that actually a lot of communications folks do, which is set an editorial calendar. This calendar is a way to plan messaging through the entire year so that there are posts related to safety on a frequent basis. You can plan safety messaging around major events that we just discussed, like Walk and Roll to School Day, which, by the way, is October 12th this year, or Halloween, where communities may see people, particularly children, walking and biking. And this steady, frequent posting helps increase awareness and building a culture of safety. So beyond your local annual schedule, there may be regional, state, and national awareness weeks that can be tied to messaging. In the communications toolkit, we provide a list of events and dates that can be tied to safety for people who walk and bike, and also share the organizations who lead these efforts so you can easily follow them. For instance, October is National Pedestrian Safety Month, which is led by USDOT and National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. And while they have not yet released their messaging for this year, we know that it's coming up, and this is something to keep an eye on for sharing and building your own safety messages. So now that we have covered program materials and ideas for how to use them and with whom, I want to turn the presentation over to Seth, who will be talking more about actual messages about safety and framing. Seth?
Thanks so much, Kristen. That was a fantastic overview of the program and all that we have to offer and all the ways it can be applied. Thank you for that. So yeah, I just want to switch things up very briefly here before we take a break. And thanks everyone for attending today's presentation and today's training and engaging with us on this critical topic here. I'm just pose a quick question for everybody. Has anyone heard of this debate around crash? It's crash, not accident. Have you heard of this before? You can put that in the chat, or if you want to speak, that's fine too. Sounds like George says, sure, that's great. And why do we think using crash over accident? Tracy is saying yes, that's wonderful. I'm glad to hear that it's gaining some traction. Kendrick saying yes as well. The thing about crash versus accident is that it sort of primes us to think in a couple of different ways, right? An accident is something that's wholly unpreventable. It was an accident. I couldn't possibly have foreseen this, right? Versus a crash is an event. A crash is actually preventable. A crash is something that is a result of maybe a system that isn't functioning like it should be. So I just wanted to kind of get that across and saying, we've come a long way, I think, in our field of transportation safety to really push the envelope and really start to question, do we want to talk about accidents really, or is it really crashes and collisions? There's a great book by Jesse Singer called There Are No Accidents. I can't remember the long subtitle, but it's a wonderful book. It speaks to traffic safety, but also safety more generally. And just a wonderful read in terms of the fact that a lot of what we see today are not really accidents per se. They're results of the systems that we have to operate in. So we can go to the next slide, please. One of the things we want to look at with respect to the system at large is the way we talk about traffic crashes and injury in our culture. One way to do this is to look at a theory that's called framing theory, that's used a lot of times in journalism and media studies. It's a very powerful theory because it helps us understand how language can shape the way we think about things. So framing is really talking, if you imagine putting a frame around a picture, you're focusing on some parts of it, things that are inside the frame, and you're neglecting other things in the frame. What frames do is tell us details about who is involved, who's responsible even for traffic crashes. It really helps shape the way we even think about these crash events. If we can go to the next slide, please. The power of framing is that journalists really have a lot of power with respect to the way, again, all of us in the public think about traffic injury, but also any number of issues. This has been studied widely. When you think about different political issues, there's been research on the education and immigration reform, the way we think about climate change and foreign policy. These are just a few examples, but even just the way we talk about something like climate change, for example. Is climate change is a naturally occurring phenomenon, or is it human caused, right? Forever we're in that debate. And you can imagine the way people might respond to something. If it's naturally occurring, you can't really do too much about that. But if it's human caused, that gives you some agency to respond to it. We can go to the next slide, please. When it comes to traffic crashes, one of the things we notice, this is based upon a lot of the studies we've done, but also other people have done, around the ways in which traffic crashes are framed, is that they tend to be framed or described as isolated events rather than predictable outcomes. And this is, we're thinking, and a lot of people think this, is that when you think about media, they want to grab people's attention. That's understood, right? That's one of the things that they operate. They really want to get something in front of us that is going to grab our attention and keep us engaged. So the media tends to focus on those things that are rare or surprising, right? Whereas automobile crashes in particular, as one example, are really not that terribly rare. There's hundreds that happen every single day. There's people that are injured pretty gravely every day and people who die every day. It's just such a common occurrence. We call it sort of a slow accretion, that it kind of slips in the background. Most crashes, even serious ones, are never reported by the media. But despite this, right, despite the fact that it's common and that it kills tens of thousands of people annually, there really isn't a concerted focus in our popular media around this major problem. If we can go to the next slide, please. And one of the reasons this matters so much is that frames really do matter. This is a great study from our colleagues, Tara Goddard, Kelsey Ralph, and others, who looked at, they presented a survey to people and just changed the language of the same crash event. So there was some language that focused on the driver's role in the crash, some focused on the person walking, their role in causing the crash, and then something else they did was look at, was it something else in the environment? Was it maybe the roadway? Was it the time of year? So they focused on what's called a thematic frame, which basically means expanding the frame out to talk about the broader trend of injury on our network, or to think about things outside of the people involved in the crash, such as the road type that they were traveling on, or the surrounding land uses, or both. So whenever they focused away from the drivers or the persons walking, they found that people were assigning more blame, and they were using that thematic frame. They were assigning more blame to things outside of the road users. They were saying, you know what, we need to look at our roadway. Our roadways, are these safe? We need to look at our policies, that sort of thing. It just shows that it can shift people's perception of who's responsible, basically, for these injuries. If we can go to the next slide, please. So this is one of the reasons we're really interested in engaging with the news media. This is a visual that comes from a guide we developed that was very much oriented to transportation and public health professionals to get involved. So you see them sort of hovering above the typical sort of information flow when crashes occur. So I can just walk through this real quickly, is that If you start with the left with the crash involved parties, right? Say the drivers and the pedestrians. These typically are communicated. If it's severe enough, often police will arrive at the scene and they'll fill out a crash report. Sometimes if it involves at-fault road user parties, either the driver or the pedestrian, or even both, it'll go to the court system. Insurance companies, again, because if it involves damages at all to any property or to people, insurance companies will be involved. And then the police often interface with the news media. There's often the public information officers or others. There's sometimes police are interviewed directly by journalists. And the courts sometimes engage with the media. We put news media in a different color here because this tends to be how the vast majority of people in the public, these are people that aren't involved in the traffic world really directly, the people, the public, and decision makers are interfacing with road injury and road trauma. We're really focused on the transportation and public health professionals getting involved in this because we think they can add more context, more nuance to people's understanding of what's really happening out there. And that's why we've developed this guidance and why we think it's critical. If we go to the next slide, please. So with that, I think what we can do right now, given that Kristen and I have thrown quite a bit at you at this point, is we can take a 10-minute break and we can come back at 1:57. If we can do that, we can pick back up, just have a few more slides on and a few more discussion points on media framing, and then I'll pass it over to Julia Casadante. Thanks. See you soon. Hope everyone had a restorative break and is ready to jump back in. We can go to the next slide, Kristen, that'd be wonderful. Welcome back. So a lot of what you heard me talk about before our break was derives from this guide that myself and colleagues had developed a couple of years ago called this. You can access it at the link below. But again, this is really about getting more people involved in helping shape the narrative around traffic injury. And of course, as the subtitle suggests, the transportation and public health professionals are really the intended audience for this, but really it could be for anyone interested in traffic safety and injury reduction. Go to the next slide, please. So within that guidance, if you want to dive deeper, please reference the guide, but this is going to be a bit of an overview. One of the things we found from a lot of the work, the literature, and the research we were doing was about reframing the conversation. Appealing to intrinsic values, I'm going to talk about what each one of these means, provide examples, depict themes over events, and inspire pragmatic can-doism. While we're doing that, identify opportune times to get involved. If we can go to the next slide, please. So what we mean by appealing to intrinsic values relates to this theory on sort of basic human values. These are universal and found in every culture they've studied thus far. And they do seem to follow this pattern of this circular function here. If you look at the top, you can see intrinsic values of self-direction, universalism, and benevolence. So what self-direction is really about is us making our own choices, our behavior being self-governed, feeling like we have agency to make meaningful choices. And then universalism is really expanding our sense of care for all people and even the environment. Benevolence is having care for those we are in close contact with, family members, close friends, things like that. As you can see, the intrinsic is opposed on the other side of the circle as to more extrinsic values. And these are values like particularly power and achievement. Power is managing or having control over people or resources. And achievement is really exactly that, is achieving results that are held in high regard in our social system. So you can kind of see one of the things that's interesting, I think, about human values is the more we appeal, the more we talk about, the more we frame things in intrinsic ways, the stronger our intrinsic values become. The more we express concern for others, the more we provide people with meaningful choice, the more we evoke family systems and close friend systems, and the less we evoke achievement or power, we strengthen intrinsic values. You can kind of see how the more we talk about money and power and influence, the extrinsic values, those become more powerful. The other thing about this is that when we do strengthen one side of the circle, it suppresses the salience or the importance of the other side of the circle. So the more we talk about care for others, the less likely we're going to want to have control over them for like a power value, for example. We can go to the next slide, please. An example of that, if really expanding our concern for others, is working with victim advocates. It's just an example. The Families for Safe Streets is such an important group, and it's lovely to see, wonderful to see this spreading throughout the US. It's because these people have directly experienced road trauma themselves or their close others in their circles, and engaging with the people that have been affected by the system is a really effective way to lift up their stories, but also frame the injury in such a way that it puts a human face to the problem. Rather than just talk about 40,000 deaths every year, we have a sense of who is affected and how everybody that's affected, that's killed or seriously injured, affects an average at least of about 5 people. So this has ripple effects through the system. We want to lift these up. And by doing that, lifting up the stories of people who are affected by road trauma, we can expand care, the sense of care, that universalist value system that people have naturally. If we can go to the next slide, please. Just as we had seen in the prior research by Goddard and colleagues, when we depict themes over events, right, placing injury in a broader time or place-based context, like the examples here, right? This is the 5th serious traffic crash in Thomas Boulevard this year. In fact, we saw a great thematic frame from a Chapel Hill news agency. I think it was Chapel Borough, if I'm not mistaken. They were talking about pedestrian crashes on MLK Boulevard in Chapel Hill. They talked about one specific crash to begin with, but then they ended on a note saying, this isn't the first crash, the only crash on this road. There's been 5 others or so. They've referenced others in the past that have occurred on this road, right? And then they also mentioned some of the environmental aspects of it, like the second example, like the driver struck the pedestrian, it lacks lighting and clearly marked crosswalks. What this does is it takes the focus off road users and onto the places in which these crashes occur, right? And when we do that, right, when we place the emphasis not on the people involved all the time, sometimes that's called for, but not all the time, we can inspire people to call for collective action. And the reason is for this is that if it's always just people doing silly things, making mistakes and being sort of dim-witted about it, then no one's going to be calling for a change to the system, right? But if we continue to say there are parts of this system that are not working for everybody, then you can inspire more people to start calling for action. If we can go to the next slide, please. And this taps right into another very American value of pragmatism. It's hard to display that on the values chart that you saw earlier, but basically we have a whole history of this, right? Of being practical, being pragmatic. And this just relates to when we think about the way traffic injury is framed as totally inevitable, as something that's even expected, that's unpreventable, right, then we get away from this pragmatic frame. If we can say instead that serious crashes are preventable and they're addressable through common sense approaches, like slower travel speeds, separating people inside and outside of motor vehicles, either in space or time. You can add to this list vehicle regulation, which control how fast vehicles can go in certain contexts, right? Those are just some examples. When we say that, you give people a sense that we can do something about this, right? It reduces that fatalist thinking that all is hopeless. And it really can tap into this American sense of can do. If we can go to the next slide, please. So one of the things that we all can do is thinking about the way we talk about traffic injury and who we involve in this, in our stories, and how we frame this as isolated or as a broader trend can happen in a number of different contexts and a number of different times. One of the things we found from our review of the literature in talking with journalists was that timely, consistent communications really can help spur a public dialogue around this problem. Because right now, that's just simply not happening. The public isn't really talking about this very much. There are times, though, there's actually broader media attention to the problem, like World Day of Remembrance, which is the third Sunday in November every year. We'll have to update this date for you all with respect to the next one coming up. But also the daylight savings time, when we know there's more, when crashes are more likely to occur, right, around the time that the day begins to become shorter. So like around daylight saving time, first day of school or university, when there's far more people probably out and about and more exposed to crash risk. Halloween, that's a key one, right? That's when a lot of kids are out there with their friends and their family. And then heavy travel times of year, Thanksgiving, winter break, spring break, and summer season travel. All these times, we can begin engaging with media to talk about traffic injury as preventable, again, with this sort of common sense approaches. And then anytime, too, there's also opportunity for cities, states, counties, any other entity that's really doing a lot of work in the safety space, because we know in North Carolina, there's a lot of this. In Vision Zero, we work in that effort. There's now 15 communities that are really devoted and have adopted Vision Zero policies and strategies. So anything like cities changing policy around lowering their speed limits, or anytime there's a major corridor retrofit, not only saying it's happening, but again, using that kind of frames around this, we're doing this to improve people's safety, and it also benefits all road users. Whenever you improve safety, for the most part, for pedestrians, cyclists, you're improving it for motorists as well. Now you have enforcement operations. Again, why we're doing this, how it improves things for everybody. Citywide traffic calming, injury prevention events and programs, and of course, Vision Zero planning. These are just examples. You can probably think of many more. And what Kristen had shared earlier on communication planning, a lot of this can happen in that context around when can we start engaging with the media and really starting to put our injury problem in a broader context, so that we get more people really advocating for safety improvements. So I think with that, I'm going to pass it over to Julia Casadante. Thank you.
Thanks, Seth. That was a great presentation, and it's awesome how much has been done with the Watch For Me program over the years. I was involved in the development of Watch For Me at its very beginnings, including working with our in-house graphics team at NCDOT to develop a lot of the materials that you've seen and that your communities utilize. So it's so great to see that those are still out there being used to spread the message and awareness of pedestrian and bicycle safety. We at NCDOT have always been integrally involved in the Watch For Me NC program. And one way that we continue to do that is through paid advertising and marketing efforts. So you all are not just out there, alone, trying to get the message out through some of these means, these are awesome tools to do that. But we at NCDOT put money toward amplifying the messages in each community. And the way that we do that is through a variety of methods. We do in the past have used everything from graffiti on sidewalks, which is pressure washed onto the sidewalk, to wraps on rideshare programs like Uber and Lyft. If you're listening to Pandora radio, you may see a Watch For Me ad pop up. A lot of people are familiar with the transit wraps we've done on buses in different locations. We put them on bar coasters. Next slide, please. And we continue to utilize some of these methods that we've done in the past, like gas pump toppers, convenience store posters, paid social media ads on Facebook and Instagram, and streaming audio, which would be like drive time radio. Next slide, please. And currently we are actually undertaking, right now you'll see Watch For Me advertising in communities. And that is things like on bike shares, on streaming ads, on Hulu TV services, sand stamps out at the coast, which are stamped pieces of sand with bicycle and pedestrian safety messaging, branded tricycles, and sidewalk decals. So those are some of the ways that we're currently out there spreading the message. Next slide, please. And like I said, this is actually an ongoing, these campaigns run every year and have since Watch For Me was instated back in I want to say, was it 2013 or something thereabouts, 2011, 2013, that the Watch For Me NC program started. And that includes right now. So starting in July of this year, just a couple months back, we started running advertising in the coastal areas to hit the summer travel season. That is kind of wrapping up now as kids went back to school, after Labor Day. We will, that campaign is now being run primarily in the Piedmont and the mountain areas, with a focus on, the timeframes being back to school, Halloween, daylight savings. There's a lot of opportunity to get bicycle and pedestrian messages out there to the communities. And specifically, we'll focus on areas with high crash indexes, which is where you may see, things like gas pump toppers, or maybe if you're on your phone in an area with a high crash index, you're at that location, you may see something pop up on your radio or your streaming radio services, or if you live in an area close by, you might see that on Hulu. So those are some of the time frame that we're working with. Next slide, please. So going back to the marketing side of things, just to reiterate that we want to help you amplify the message, and we are also doing that not just through paid media, but by putting out ads through the North Carolina Governor's Highway Safety Program on social media. And some of our partners are doing that too. These are easy ways to reach a large audience. We found social media tends to spark great conversation around these topics as well. For example, this post you see on the right was something that was just put up a couple weeks ago. We have a long dialogue going with people of varying opinions about bicycle and pedestrian safety, including advocates for bike and ped, people that are more, on the motor vehicle side of things and looking at it from that perspective. But I wanted to say, this is a great community forum. It can be a little hard to monitor these. At some point, we don't respond to every negative, comment, especially if it's not a question. But we find that it really gets people engaged in talking and thinking about the behaviors, and it can be a really powerful tool to drive community conversation. So we always suggest going to the repository that HSRC has, where you can shop for kind of posters and images and stuff. that is some great graphics to put up on social media, and they're easy to use. And just a reminder that October is a big month for all this, and a great opportunity to continue to spread the bike and ped safety awareness message. So definitely be thinking about using some of those during the month of October. Next slide, please. Some other social media tips, and I know this has been touched on a little in this webinar already, so won't spend too much time on it, but anytime we kind of follow what our partners are doing through our social media tracking at DOT. So Chapel Hill Police Department will often post about their campaigns and the success of them when they're running an enforcement effort. We love when people tag us, so we can, either Governor's Highway Safety Program or NCDOT comms, so we can see what you guys are doing. And this is just a great way to tell the community that you're out there and you're being active with this issue as part of the Watch for Me NC program. This is just an example on the left of Chapel Hill, what they did after an enforcement campaign. If it's involved with Watch for Me, we love a Watch for Me NC hashtag. And thanks, Seth. That's another good point. The World Day of Remembrance is Sunday, November 20th. Also a great time to get some traffic safety messages out there on your social media. Kill Devil Hills out here on the right, they were out providing new helmets and safety equipment to local communities, right? So just snapping a couple photos, posting it on their social media channels, hashtagging Watch for Me NC, NCDOT. They were able to spread the message that they're out there being actively engaged in their communities through this program to make communities safer. So if there's ever people who are asking, well, what are you doing with Watch for Me, or what are you doing to improve bicycle and pedestrian safety in your community? This is a real tangible thing you can point to and say, hey, we just did this enforcement event. And this is one of the ways that we're trying to be out there and making an impact and kind of, boost your positive overall profile in a community. Next slide, please. And that's all I really had today. The primary purpose of my talk was just to give you guys an insight into the overall marketing efforts that we do in conjunction with what you all are doing in your communities with, enforcement and education, just to let you know, we are also out there trying to boost your profile and amplify your efforts in a meaningful way through some of those targeted marketing efforts. You're welcome to ask questions at the end, pop them in the chat. And if you ever want more information about what we're doing over NCDOT, here are our social media feeds. That's a great way to follow us. We do a lot of stuff with bike and ped, as well as other areas of traffic safety, construction, engineering, all that. So with that, I will turn it back over to Kristen and HSRC.
Thank you so much, Julia. And thank you, Seth, as well, for all of the information that you shared with us today. And I'll just leave this slide on this questions slide because I failed to do one in general. So thanks, Julia, for putting that together. Again, we kind of have a smaller group today. So anyone, if you have any questions, feel free to just unmute yourself and ask away. Or if you would rather put it through the chat, that's fine as well. I know we shared a lot, so you might still be digesting information.
I noticed that this is Sarah O'Brien. I noticed that George posted in the chat about happy to know about the ad placements on Pandora, and that he was super surprised and gratified about that. I'm kind of curious, anybody on the call, have you actually encountered one of these ads in the wild in the past, either on Pandora or in a social media location?
No, Sarah, this is George. I have been hearing them. It's been a while since I've been on Pandora, but I actually did hear them in the wild, so to speak, and was again very surprised to begin with, and then I'm like, dang, that's great, fantastic.
Yeah, thanks. Good to hear that. Yeah, I think I want to say last year, maybe the year before, I came across it on Facebook, I think. So apparently I'm part of the targeted demographics.
I have also seen them in the wild, also online, embedded within news stories, I want to say.
Yeah, I think that's what I think it
But
was like I
again,
clicked on a news story link from Facebook and saw the ad.
I think we might be biased though, given how many times we might visit the Watch For Me website.
Maybe so. Any other questions or comments? Okay, turn it back over to Kristen.
Okay, we might be able to end early today then. So I jumped ahead as we were talking about the website so that I could share a few links and emails for you to contact us or find out more information. I know a lot of the information we shared earlier can all be accessed from the partner resources website, especially that communications toolkit that I talked so much about. And then let me jump back a slide, I'm out of sorts here. So the next steps will be for me to go ahead and send you an email to thank you again for joining the presentation today, and to remind you to please respond to the workshop assessment, especially if you are a law enforcement officer from a Watch For Me community. You want to make sure that we track your attendance, and anyone, please respond to the assessment as it helps for any future programming we might be doing and helps inform our next steps. And then it will also be to let you know when a recording is available so that you can share this information with a communications contact person if you think that would be helpful in your community. And finally, I just have one more slide with all of the communications contacts that you heard from today, including Julia Casadante. Her email is listed below. And Sarah just put in a good reminder that Watch For Me NC communities have until September 23rd to complete any outstanding trainings needed to be eligible for your Watch For Me materials. Okay, well, I am going to close up our presentation for today. Let me thank you once again for attending this workshop and all of the others so far this year. And you know where to find us and how to reach us. Don't hesitate to give us a call. All right, thanks everyone. Take care.